Right. Okay, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this roundtable titled Polish Cinema in the 20th and 21st Centuries, from the Center to the Margins. My name is Łukasz Stanek, and I am a professor of architectural history here at this university and acting director of the Copernicus Center. And before I introduce the roundtable today, let me announce our program for the winter semester. In winter, we are convening a series of events which address the exchanges between Poland and countries in Africa and Asia during the 20th century, which is a topic that is very close to my own research interests. And we are planning 4 events in a series that we've titled Southeast. We will start in February with a talk by social scientist Kacper Pobłocki, whom I've asked to talk about the ambiguous position of Poland within Europe's colonial history. And then in March, we will have a group of artists called Slavs and Tatars, and they are Kasia Kolczak and Payam Sharifi. And they are going to talk first about Poland's relationship with Iran in the 70s and 80s, and then they will have a lecture performance on radical reading. Slavs and Tatars also are the designers of our poster. And then by the end, in April, we are going to listen to the Polish Ghanaian author Olivia Bocłomciu. And so this is for the next semester, but for this semester, and indeed the highlight of this semester, we are going to welcome you to the roundtable of the Widzinski Fellows. And let me start by expressing our gratitude and welcome to our special guest and donor, Diane Widzinski, who I know doesn't want to be introduced at length, so just let me tell you how much we appreciate your generosity and how much this fellowship in the last years have grown in relevance and in competitiveness indeed. Thanks to Diane's generous gift, we are able to offer the Diane Widzinski Visiting Fellowships for Polish scholars and artists and journalists and public figures. And they are coming to the University of Michigan to conduct and share their research on contemporary Polish society and politics. And this autumn, we have the pleasure to host 2 fellows, Professors Elżbieta Durys and Magdalena Zdrodowska. Elżbieta Durys is Associate Professor of Cultural Studies at the University of Warsaw. Her research focuses on contemporary Polish historical cinema, the mediation of memory in film, and in film education. Informed by critical theory and gender study, she has written numerous articles on film. She co-edited 2 volumes on American cinema and 2 volumes on gender in culture. She also published 3 books in Polish. First, an analysis on John Cassavetes' films, a monograph on American police movies, and the book Film as a Source of Historical Knowledge. And Elżbieta's talk today is called Contemporary Polish Historical Cinema, the Cinema of National Remembrance. And the second speaker today is Magdalena Zdrodowska. She is an Associate Professor of Media Studies and Culture Studies in the Institute of Audiovisual Arts at the Jagiellonian University in Kraków. And she works at the intersection between disability studies, deaf studies, history of technology, and film studies. Her current research interest is the relationship between cinema and deafness. She studies deaf-related technologies, spectatorship, and filmmaking as a vantage point on the history of cinema as art and technology. And she has published 2 books, Television in the Borderlands and Telephone, Cinema and Cyborgs, both in Polish. And she is currently working on her 3rd book, titled Deaf Cinema, which is also the title offer talk today. So we will listen to our speakers for 20 minutes, and then we will have a conversation until roughly 6:30, and then you're all invited to a small reception next door. Elżbieta, the floor is yours.
Hello. Yeah. Thank you, Łukasz, for this nice introduction. And before I proceed with my presentation, as you know, my stay here at the Copernicus Center for Polish Studies at the University of Michigan has been made possible through the generous fellowship sponsored by Mrs. Widzinski. I would like to express my heartfelt gratitude for making this opportunity a reality. Diane, thank you very much. I also want to extend my warm thanks to everyone at the Copernicus and Weiser Centers for their dedication and support. Your care, professionalism have allowed me to focus fully on my research and have truly made me feel at home here. Thank you as well. So we will proceed now. Let me start with the, So, in my presentation, I will focus on this, what is the center of Polish contemporary cinema. Actually, this is like historical cinema. And to start, I will come back to the 1989. Then I will proceed with a little bit describing the second wave of historical cinema, which is called the Cinema of National Remembrance, and the name will be explained later, this name. And then I will focus in the third part of my presentation on one of the tendencies within Cinema of National Remembrance, which is the conspiracy framed past tendency, as I called it. So let's start with the timeline. 1989, the collapse of communism and the need of Polish society to reconstruct their identity. After 4 years living in an authoritarian country under the social state, now we had to transfer to democracy and reconstruct our identity. With Poles, it is like that we tend to do this through turning to history, to past. So usually it is like that past and the history helps us to reconstruct our identity. So abolition of censorship in 1990 helped us with that, because we could finally start talking about the events or the people or that actually were passed over with silence or completely erased, or we could just look at the past events from different perspective. So this resulted in social transformation of the 1990s. So it was not only economical transformation, but also the identity transformation. And also, we should add to this the fact that cinema has always been very important for Polish culture and Polish society. So during the communist time, it was an area of freedom. So even though it was under the supervision of communists, filmmakers could actually do a lot and to communicate with the audience using different language, metaphors, and so on, just to provide a kind of safety valve for resentment, for anger, and so on. Later on, with the change, with the social transformation, filmmakers couldn't do this fully because they had a little bit. It was difficult for them to figure out the new reality, but they tried. So they turned to history, and they started making historical cinema, and this was this first wave of historical cinema. So you have it here. But then situation changed again in 2004 with our accession to European Union and stabilization of the whole system through establishment of the Polish Film Institute, which helped to support on the yearly basis the new production of films. And also Polish Film Institute supported Polish culture in that sense that they scored some more points for the projects that actually talked about history and about Polish past. Thus, the second wave of historical cinema that started with Katyń by Andrzej Wajda, released in 2007. And we can say that this wave of historical cinema ended with the election of October 15, 2023, when we again could, after the long time of politics, of right-wing politics of memory, we could regain the public institutions again. So there was this. I think we can recognize this switch in contemporary cinema again, but. When you count this, over 18 years, 120 historical movies were made. So on average, it is 6 or 7 movies. Maybe it's not that much from American perspective, but from Polish perspective, it's really a lot. To add to this Polish interest in history, we should also mention the foundation of the Institute of National Remembrance, which played a very important role in the way that history was presented by journalists, by politicians, and so on. This type of institutions were created in many post-socialist countries. Ours, IPN, was created in 2000 and was to investigate Nazi and communist crimes against Polish nation in the 20th century. It also had research and educational purposes. They could investigate and illustrate, but very quickly they got involved in public life through media and politics. And now you know that our president is one of the former directors of one of the local IPN institutes. So this politics of history that they promoted was very much oriented toward a conservative and right-wing leaning. Officially, the goal was to shape social awareness and identity through historical knowledge, granted in, as they call it, discovery of the truth about the 20th century Polish history. But very quickly, it turned into something that Lech Niejakowski labeled as martyrological offensive. And this martyrological offensive could be described by the emphasis on Catholicism and the linking of Polish state and national history with Christianity. Poland was also portrayed as a bulwark of Christianity and the bastion of civilization, so between West and East. Our past was perceived as a sacrifice that was framed as a necessary to fulfill God's plan, so we were chosen ones. And it was accompanied with promotion of a special heroism, the Pole warrior topos, also glorification of struggle and idealization of armed action. Together with the denial or marginalization of the darker pages of history. And it was all embedded with pressing for the national unity based on ethnic rather than civic conception of the nation. So what movies did, how they discovered the truth about the past, they reached for the events that were either silenced or falsified by communist historiography. They presented figures who were erased from history, or they interpreted given events in accordance with right-wing values and beliefs. And in the context of cinema, it really became very quickly obvious, because I am here referring to the article published already in 2009, so 2 years after the release of Katyń. And Witold Mrozek, he not only stressed the fact through the analysis of the construction of dominant narrative based on history of Poland as both victim and hero of liberation struggle, but also he used this name of Institute of National Remembrance to label the second wave of historical cinema as a cinema of national remembrance. That's why the name. Mrozek also noticed the persistent romantic myths, which were very strongly related to Polish culture. The myth of martyrdom, accompanied by or strengthened by Adam Mickiewicz's idea of Poland as the Christ of nation. He recognized the polarization of characters, so there was always us versus them, and us were heroes and we were victims and we were glorious and so on, and them, they were communists and they were usually villains. So to sum up, the CNR promotes traditional vision of society, nation and gender relations, Polish Catholicism, patriarchy and ethno-nationalism. This is the generalization, but most of the cases, this is the picture. So here you have a couple of titles, but you have to remember that Cinema of National Remembrance is heterogeneous. It uses different modes and aesthetics, so both classical narration and art cinema, and also more experimental formats. It was made by different kind of directors, both in terms of generations and sensitivity and approach. Use different approach to history, both traditional textbook style and this social history style of discussing the past. It also was different. It was financed not only by Polish Film Institute, but private companies like ITI, religious institutions like Lux Veritatis Foundation, and Polish public television, especially since 2016. And it used different genres and formulas, like male action cinema and women's melodrama leaning genres. And we will come back to this later on. So since the very beginning, film scholars and journalists try to discern, to map Cinema of National Remembrance. So Magdalena Urbańska suggested that we should introduce the division into Cinema of National Remembrance in its narrow sense versus the post-transitional cinema. Jakub Majmurek wrote about monumental and settlement of accounts films. There were also some cycles recognized, new insurrectionary cinema focusing on Warsaw Uprising, cinema of lustration, anxiety, movies about cursed soldiers or biopics. My question, and now we are going to the third part, the focus actually of my recent research, is how do they do this? So it's not so much what they tell, but what kind of formulas and what kind of language do they use to convey those meanings? Yeah, and here is my background and my interest in film genres. Working. So I try to look at historical cinema not so much in terms of facts or if it tells the truth or it falsifies the events and so on, but I try to look at it from formulas it elaborates and it uses to tell about specific events. So historical cinema is this umbrella term for different genres and different formulas, but it also uses the genre mixing, especially now. So it uses elements of investigation, resembling crime cinema. It uses melodrama. We can also say that Western and gangster cinema are also, in a sense, historical cinema. So this is what I suggested to do with Cinema of National Remembrance. I suggested that we can discern three different tendencies, and I am going to focus on this second one. Thus, I will start with the first one, and then I will proceed with the third, and then finally the second one. So heroization tendency uses melodrama, and it uses melodrama to clarify the past, giving the experience of powerlessness as a comprehensible narrative form. So it uses melodrama to tell why we suffered and to find the meaning in this suffering. So, and this is this idea of melodramatic political discourse suggested by Elizabeth Anker. As far as this past in Orwo colors, it is more referring to aesthetics, and here I haven't worked on that much, but I am very much influenced by the book by Weronika Pechek, who wrote about historical memory in Czech Republic in her book Velvet Retro. And there she says that aesthetics is being used also to convey meanings, but at the same time to preserve distance. So in a sense, we can say that it is using nostalgia, but in this more reflexive form. But what interests me the most is the usage of crime genre formulas, and because of the fact that in most of the cases conspiracy paranoid thinking is stressed, I labeled this as conspiracy framed past tendency. And again, we are going to basics, so to the crime cinema and how it is being defined. So again, we here have umbrella term that encompasses a wide range of genres and subgenres, like gangster cinema, cop, police cinema, police cinema, thriller, courtroom dramas, serial killer cinema. So it has to have investigative plot. There must be a mystery to uncover. It may be crime, corruption, or hidden truth. There must be three kinds of characters: criminal, victim, and law enforcement figure. And if we have the perspective of criminal, it is gangster movie. If we have the perspective of victim, usually it is either thriller or courtroom drama. If we have the perspective of law enforcement figure, it is detective drama or cop cinema, police cinema. Crime and its consequences are at the center of the narrative in crime cinema, and crime cinema problematizes law and order, crime and society, crime and criminality, social origins of crime and violence, and the way that we think about those issues, how we actually recognize these very abstract things. So to proceed with my thinking, I took advantage of Luc Boltanski's book, Mysteries and Conspiracies. In this book, he analyzes, he makes a sort of like anthropological analysis of detective stories and spy novels, British and French, from the end of 19th century and the beginning and 20th century. He puts it in the context of democratic national or national society building, and he claims that mystery and spy fiction familiarizes people with democratic state institution, their functions and their workings. So common people couldn't figure out what state actually means, especially in the situation of order disruption, like, for example, some sort of crime, murder, and so on. And Boltanski says that through reading crime novels, detective stories, and spy novels, people, could figure out the workings of the state. So I had to appropriate the Boltanski analysis a little bit. So from detective stories and spy novels, I went to movies. From British and French, so the West, I went to peripheral Poland, and from the end of 19th and 20th century, I went to post-1989 nation reconstruction in Poland. So we have again the same context, democratic/national society building, and again, with this eruption of crime fiction, I think we can say that also we can recognize the workings of the fiction and how to figure out this how society should work. I also added one more element. So very often when we talk about crime cinema, the issue of masculinity appears. So very often it is like closely connected with the crisis, or what we call the crisis of masculinity. And here you have the book by Philippa Gates, Detecting Men. She goes through Hollywood cinema since the beginning up until 2000, and she like reconstructs how masculinity works in the context of crime cinema. Frank Krutnik wrote about this in the context of film noir. I did this partially in the context of cop cinema, police cinema, which, as I said, I use it here. But this was Hollywood. And now I should also add that in the 1990s, this Hollywood elaborated formulas were spread worldwide. And we can say that we have a global crime cinema. So the crime formulas elaborated in the American context were used locally usually to discuss local problems of social problems, and you can remember it very easily from Nordic noir fictions, both novels and TV series that were very popular a couple of years ago. But the thing is, as Andrew Nastingen analyzed this, that when those formulas were used in these local contexts, in national context, usually they were very much linked with critical analysis, with critical reference to what is going on in a social context. So we can say that also it was the same in Polish cinema. Quite a number of films appeared at the early of 2010s. You have four, the most famous one here on the slide. And they used crime formulas, and they stressed the conspiracy. Yes, it was maybe, probably it was, for sure it was connected with the fact that we had a huge corruption problem back then, and it was reworked in cinema as such. But what I did, I tried to think about crime formulas in the context of historical cinema, this Cinema of National Remembrance. And as you can see, at first I listed The Dark House, and then there was nothing for a long time. And then in the mid of 2010s, there were 3 movies, then 2021, 2 movies, and 2023, 3 movies. Yeah. So all of them used the crime formulas, and except of The Last Witness, which was like more film noir leaning, the rest of them actually employed cop cinema, police cinema formulas. So we here in those movies there is a switch, because Cinema of National Remembrance tended to focus on World War II, or what was very closely after it. Here it is a little bit different. The focus is more on state socialism period, so 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. There are factual events, and you have them here, linked with the movies. But it was more focused on social history. So as I said, mostly cop cinema. and we have main protagonist, young policeman with potential at the beginning of his career, usually of lower strata, so police is a possibility of social advancement. And making a policeman, back then militiant, the main protagonist was very risky from the perspective of those filmmakers, because you have to remember that Milicja Obywatelska, which is a communist police, it was very despised by society. Yeah, so making this kind of figure the main protagonist and making us, feel sympathetic towards him was a little bit risky. So he conducts investigation, and this investigation is his first big case. So the stakes are high, but when he uncovers the truth about the crime, there is also another painful discovery: a network of connections with the criminal world or hidden power structures that he discovers. He is usually accompanied by a guardian, guide, or advisor, who actually tends to be at the beginning mentor, or sometimes it is even father or foster father, but it turns to be a shapeshifter, so false mentor. And this person usually more like protects the institution and take care that this young man doesn't disrupt what is going on too much. So it is very painful. This situation is very painful for this young man. So we can connect it with something that Małgorzata Radkiewicz identified as a motive recurring in Polish cinema, the motive of negative initiation, when young men experience a sort of initiation among older men, but in this situation, it is not ending up with, becoming a, heroic man and, powerful, masculine and so on. But this young man ends up broken. Yeah. And there is in those movies, you can see the scenes that actually very much visualize this. So these scenes are emotional rapture appears in sudden outbursts and scenes of humiliation. Characters explode without warning, thrashing around rooms, throwing objects or hitting walls. Their faces concord, they grasp hold or break into laughter. Some collapse or freeze as they try to steady their breath. They sob or cry. The surge of emotion overwhelms bodies that were once tightly controlled. These outbursts often unfold alongside heavy drinking, and it's accompanied with a very specific sound design. So thus the protagonists in these films, young men who initially appeared as beneficiaries of state socialist modernization and upward mobility, ultimately emerge as its victims, figures who are broken, disillusioned, or at the very least marked by the experience. So let me wrap up this section. These scenes, understood as visualization of the wound, appear repeatedly in historical films associated with the Cinema of National Remembrance. The bodily reactions portrayed in those moments mark the situation as potential sites of trauma. The resulting wound, expressed through the body, becomes foundational to the male subject identity. For the young protagonist, the socialist state is experienced as a moment of negative initiation by older men. This retroactive marking allows these elders to be depicted not so much as a representative of patriarchy, but mostly as a components of the socialist system itself. In doing so, the films enable to preserve a sense of victimhood by presenting the socialist period as a criminal regime governed by anonymous others. They obscure people's own participation, the ambiguity of historical circumstances, and the multidimensional nature of the system, including its modernization processes. This leads back into the cycle in which identity is shaped through the denial of agency and the description of victimhood. So, to wrap up this whole, as I said, Poles are past-oriented. Collective identity usually is is created by recalling to historical events. After 1989, in rebuilding their national identity, they once again turned to history. Cinema plays an important role in Polish public life. It is treated as a platform for public debate. This became even more visible after the financial stabilization through the creation of the Polish Film Institute. The second wave of historical films, which began around 2007, was shaped by right-wing politics of memory. This is why we call it the Cinema of National Remembrance. Within this cinema, we can identify several tendencies. One of them is the conspiracy-framed past tendency, which draws on crime genre formulas. As in global crime cinema, these formulas are used to expose the failures of state socialism. However, the critical edge is dulled by the protective fiction, one that portrays men as victims wronged by the system. Thank you very much.
We need a small technical break to change the source of image. Okay, can you hear me well?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And before I begin, I would like to express my sincere gratitude to Diane Widzinski for making my visit to the University of Michigan possible. And the Widzinski Fellowship far exceeded my expectations in terms of support that I have received here for my academic work, but also in terms of warm hospitality of the Copernicus Center staff, people who work here, but also people who come together around this institution. And I'm practically grateful for the opportunity to share deaf films to the audience of the Ann Arbor Polish Film Festival. And it was actually the first time that Polish deaf films were screened as a part of a Polish film festival. So it was very, very important for me. And I also had chance to get to know Elżbieta better, which I value greatly. And I'm pretty sure that I will come back to Poland not only with my book Advance, but also with some new friends. So that was an extremely important and great experience for me. And okay, to begin with, Elżbieta walked us through the very center of Polish film, and I would like to show you the emergence of it. And the presentation brings you a part of a book-length project that is called Deaf Cinema that I worked on during my stay here at the Copernicus Center as a Widzinski Fellow. And the main intervention in the deaf cinema is the reorientation of the deaf studies and film studies perspective on the relationship between deafness and film. And it is usually addressed and narrated in terms of the representation of deaf characters on the screen on one hand, or on the other, it is addressed through the accessibility of film, but also audiovisual media in general to deaf audiences. However, as those perspectives are very relevant and interesting and important, I would like to practice the call by Arseli Dokumasi, an anthropologist with a disability, to practice disability as a method. She proposes to consider the disabled body as something to think with, rather to think about. And my aim is using the tools of historical narrative, film studies, film history, deaf studies, disability studies, creep theory, but also ethnographic methodology to present and analyze the active and creative participation of deaf filmmakers and deaf audiences in both silent and sound film. And before we go any further, I would like to address the case of notation that you will see in this presentation. I used the lower D and capital D deafness and deaf, which is the capital D deaf relates to communities and individuals who use sign language proudly, who see themselves as members of language minority and therefore cultural minority as well. This concept is very politically charged. And lower D deaf is used in relation to other deaf people. It is rather description of a physical medical condition. So when I use both capital and lower D deaf, I would like to relate to the whole spectrum of the deaf experience. And the history of deaf film is usually told from the American perspective, and there is a reason for this. Deaf people started to use film in very early on, actually before Charlie Chaplin went into the movies. It was the very early 1910s when they actually weaponized film as a tool in political struggle for recognition of sign language. So these films were all about sign language. These were the showcases of the finest signing. They were portraying the masters of sign language to prove that sign language is a language and is able to realize the discourses of art, politics, religion, all sorts of academia as well, all sorts of discourses. And actually, this story tends to be universalized as a story of deaf filmmaking worldwide in more general. And in my project, I would like to disrupt this idea or pluralize this deaf film history by presenting the Polish deaf film movement and film tradition, which will be the main topic for me today. And the last thing I would like to mention is also the challenges of protecting deaf film heritage and the role of deaf citizen archivists, as I call them. Okay, so let's begin. And my entry point to deaf film history was actually through this American case, this American project of deaf in the early 1910s. And film is actually the first technology able to record sign language. I was wondering if the same happened in Poland, if deaf people in Poland were also extensively using film. And at that point, I was conducting a completely different project on how deaf people use technologies, and I was interviewing elderly deaf people, and I started to ask them if they can remember anyone having camera or making films when they were younger. And actually the deaf filmmakers started to emerge just one after another, and it turned out that in socialist Poland there was a surprisingly active and dynamic amateur deaf film movement, and it was not typical for Poland. It happened also in other countries of Eastern Europe, but it is a completely different story of deaf filmmaking than the American one. So what I would like to present you is the very short overview of the Polish deaf filmmaking, which I divided into three chronological phases: the socialist period, the transformation, which is the 1990s and 2000s, and contemporary deaf filmmaking, which started in 2010s. So let's begin with the socialist period. Okay, so just after the Second World War, when the cameras were becoming cheaper, lighter, more affordable here in the States, but also in Western Europe, in Poland, due to political conditions, the post-war crisis, the technological backwardness, this kind of equipment was not accessible to average people for a long, long time. So who had access to film equipment were the institutions, basically. And at the same time, just after the Second World War, the Polish Association of the Deaf was established, which was the first nationwide deaf institution. And it had very typical structure. It was centralized. There was a center headquarters in Warsaw, but there was quite dense network of local branches of Polish Association of the Deaf in the city, in the cities throughout the Poland. And they run deaf clubs, cultural centers, also cooperatives in which deaf people worked. And this network was strong and wealthy enough to buy cameras. And the cameras were bought to, just as you can, to make films like this, to document the institution's life and also community's life. When someone important was coming from Warsaw, they wanted to have it on film. When there were some sports events or some gatherings or congresses, cameras were bought just to document and celebrate the life of the institution. But to have camera was not enough. You had to have someone to operate this machine. And actually, there were like people who were interested in technology, who were interested in photography, in cars, who were not afraid of technology. They were asked or assigned to learn how to use cameras and to serve as this cameraman who would document the life of the Polish Association of the Deaf. So these were the people who were exclusively men, who were interested in technology, who were not afraid of it, and camera was just another instrument, another tool that they had to learn to operate. They were also very often like tinkerers. They were very fluent, so to say, in technology. And with time, however, they started to make films in more than documentary way. They started to experiment with the medium, to just go after their creative visions, as you can see here on Olgierd Lech's film about his motorbike Junak. That was the brand for motorbikes back then. And they were establishing the local deaf film clubs, using this very extensive network of Polish Association of the Deaf. And they used the association's equipment. These people didn't own cameras. They were too expensive for them. So they used these institutions' cameras just to experiment with the film. And this one is maybe not too elaborate, as you can see, but I would like to draw your attention to how many different frames and angles are used here. It is very visible that they play with the medium. They play with this motorbike riding and filming it at the same time. In the 1970s and 1980s, cheap, affordable cameras from Czechoslovakia came, and this movement, amateur deaf film movement, was growing, and as more and more people had access to the cameras, but still they were of quite poor quality, so it was impossible to do good films indoors, so they were mainly used for travelogues, hiking films, or films like that. And it was not only the Polish tendency. I had the chance to visit the collection of deaf films, deaf Czechoslovak films in Prague. And while I was watching those films, I could see very many, these are just the screenshots from those films. I could see very many images of other deaf people having cameras and using camera. It was quite widespread. It was very, very popular. And here is an interesting thing. The Polish deaf filmmaking was very, very parallel and actually went through the same phases as hearing amateur film movement in Poland. They were both, grow from the institutions, the Association of the Deaf in the case of deaf, and the workplaces like the factories, the manufacturing plants in the case of hearing people. So in both cases, these institutions wanted to have their operations being documented and celebrated through film. They recruited people who didn't have any previous experience with film to operate the cameras for them, and these people went from documentation of institutional life to individual film practice, still using the employers or the associations equipment, and overlapping the institutional and film networks with film clubs, film festivals, film contests. But still, those two movements were completely separated. Deaf filmmakers were not attending the festivals of hearing amateur filmmakers, basically because of the language barrier. The deaf people were signing, there was no connection between those two groups, basically the deaf films were created and distributed in deaf circles, in deaf close networks, so to say. Then came the 1989, and the transformation from socialism to capitalism was not gentle for people with disabilities, to put it mildly. And one of the many problems was the funding scheme. The Polish Association of the Deaf survived this transition, this change, but just as all other public sector disability, and not only disability institutions, they had to constantly apply for funds, not private, state funds. So instead of this little but steady funding from the state, they have to constantly compete with other disability institutions for money. So it was this capitalist policy of like constant competition for the very scarce resources by the institutions of actually really unprivileged groups, which had a very deep impact on the disability movement in Poland. But it is quite interesting that for deaf filmmaking, this quite harsh conditions were very beneficial, I would say, and it led to boom in deaf filmmaking. And because Polish Association of the Deaf and the local branches had to constantly write projects to get money for running their institutions from the state, one of the local branches of Polish Association of the Deaf, the one in Szczecin, came up with the idea of vocational training for deaf people, and it was the time of very high unemployment. So the idea was to give deaf people the profession that was the VHS cameraman, and VHS was very expensive in Poland, but it was also very popular. People wanted to have their weddings and family gatherings recorded, so it was very popular to hire VHS cameramen, and the idea was that to train deaf people to serve this role. So what was supposed to be this vocational training workshop turned out to be filmmaking extravaganza that lasted 6 years, between 1996 and 2002, and this local branch of Polish Association of the Deaf was submitting the same proposal each year for 2 weeks, a workshop, national film and video workshop for the deaf. And during these workshops, they lasted 2 weeks each. There was like courtyard by the sea rented for the participants, and they were just locked in this place, and they recall this as the best time of their lives. They were making films day and night, all the time. They were close there with two filmmakers, professional hearing filmmakers. One, the graduate of the Polish Film School in Łódź. The second was the graduate of FAMU, the film school in Prague. And they were, through these 2 weeks, they were making films, watching films, discussing them, learning how to use light on the set, how to frame, how to edit films, how to write scripts. These were extremely intense film workshops for these people. And these deaf people were recruited from different local branches of Polish Association of the Deaf. Actually, they were already film enthusiasts. They were already making films. They used the cameras of the Polish Association of the Deaf. They used VHS cameras that were, as I said, very expensive back then. They didn't have their own. And as you can see here, that each of these groups had to finish the workshop with their own film. And that is one of the examples that actually shows how badly VHS ages, actually, when it is not well preserved. But it also shows that these films are actually quite nicely done feature films. There is a plot that you can follow. They are framed nicely. There is a good montage. There is a good editing. There are shots and counter shots. They are quite well done when it comes to technicalities. But you can probably also say and see that they don't use sign language, just as the ones from the previous socialist era. As you can see here, for example, they use the genre of slapstick comedy, just as Charlie Chaplin did his films, so that there is no verbal communication there. And it is actually quite true for the previous era as well, when even when there was a documentation going on, and when a group of deaf people were realized that they are on the screen, they stopped signing. So it is quite interesting. The absence of sign language is quite interesting, and it is something that places Polish deaf film movement just on the other side as a binary to what was going on in United States, where all filmmaking was just about sign language. So from this perspective, the Polish films wouldn't fulfill the definition of deaf film because they don't use the sign language. And this example opens up the notion of what actually is deaf film, because these films were made by the deaf community who uses sign language, but not on the screen actually. And it changed dramatically in this third phase in the contemporary deaf filmmaking, which is on one hand the professionalization of how films are made, because due to the changes in deaf education in the 1990s and 2000s, more and more deaf people can access higher education. There are still exceptionally hardworking and talented people. This road is not wide open for them, but still there is this new wave of deaf filmmakers who actually graduated from art schools. So they use very different types of filmmaking, including animation, video art, or performance. And this is also the generation of younger people who were exposed in 2010s to this American model of deafness written with capital D. Deafness that is treated as identity, and they are proudly deaf. They use sign language as a marker of their linguistic and cultural identity. And their films are different. They they are centered around sign language. They use metaphors to describe the experience of deaf people, but also the role of sign language in this experience. As you can see here in Tomasz Grabowski's film Magic Gloves, he used this metaphor of magic, colorful gloves that brings language and communication to this character who was like in this black and white world without isolated, without access to language. He just narrates that thanks to sign language he has access to other people, he can communicate with other people. And it is very typical for like global American also deaf art to use these metaphors. And actually these films are intended to be seen by hearing audiences as well, and this is also the difference in relation to the previous ones. They are not distributed in closed circuits of deaf people. They are on YouTube. They are promoted. They are to tell. Of course, deaf people to tell this experience and build community around this, but also to tell hearing people how sign language is important for deaf people. And the last thing that I would like to mention is that the film, Polish deaf film heritage is actually not recognized as heritage in Poland by the institutions such as museums, galleries, archives. It is not recognized as heritage also by the Polish Association of the Deaf, which is to some extent still governed by hearing people, and for them the history of institution and the tradition of institution is more important than the heritage and tradition of deaf community. So there is a problem with collecting and preserving deaf films, and actually this is done by figures that I call citizen archivists. And these, in general, citizen archivists are people, volunteers who offer their time, their effort, to their skills to catalog, transcribe, and digitize sources held by archives, by museums. And these institutions profit from this volunteering work, not only in financial terms, having this done for free, but also symbolically. They can present these volunteers as the community that supports the institution. So I apply this term to deaf film enthusiasts who provide an essential unpaid service to the community by looking for these old, not only old, but deaf films in general. They preserve them, they store them, they digitize them, they keep these numerous VHSs at their homes. Their families have to live with them and with these huge collections, which is the problem that is raised when I interview these people, that this passion just takes away the space at home for them and for their families. And they work in isolation and they follow very different archival practices. So these collections are not compatible, I would say. They are scattered and they are very hybrid. Some are individual collections stored at home. Some deaf people, deaf enthusiasts who are actually filmmakers themselves usually, they, for example, donate those collections to the museums, and you have to know to which museum it was donated. So it is quite challenging for me as a hearing scholar to actually access these collections, these films. So to wrap up this presentation, I would like to stress that the case of the Polish filmmaking, deaf filmmaking challenges the linearity of the historical narrative on the deaf film by acknowledging various contexts and conditions of deaf filmmaking, such as for example, availability of film equipment that is and was different in different parts of the world, that translated to the technological entry point for different communities and the different trajectories of evolution of deaf film in different countries. Therefore, the cultural, political, social, economic contexts actually translates to the local and temporal diversity of deaf filmmaking. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Elżbieta and Magda. We have good 20 minutes for conversation and questions. While people are waiting, let me start perhaps with the first questions. To Elżbieta, I was curious to hear about kind of your passing comment about the use of color as a historicizing exercise, as a way to build historical distance. And so I was wondering, in what way is this history that you presented, or in what way are the movies presenting that history in relationship to the present? In other words, what is the negative about the stories that the movies talk about? The cinema of historical remembrance, as you put it, to the current conditions in which these movies were made, right? And to Magda, a question. You mentioned something I did wonder when you were talking, which was the question on the audience. And I was wondering if you could elaborate on that, and both in terms of the intentions, but also perhaps in terms of the media and the institutions that actually offer these movies to other audiences. I was very struck and very interested in the movies that you have shown in the festival about how kind of explicit they are in terms of the deaf experience and how perhaps activists they are, if that's the right word. But then, it was also the first time I have seen it. And so that kind of makes me wonder, they are activists. What exactly are the institutions that help them to take action?
So in terms of what are the relationship of Cinema of National Remembrance to the situation around, it is like that on one hand cinema still sets the paths for developing the public discussions, but on the other hand it is like that some of the topics are not discussed even though movies are good. And I think that they should be more openly discussed, in many ways. So it is like that they resonate, for sure they resonate. Like, for example, the Operation Hyacinth was made, the movie is about, the Operation Hyacinth is the communist government action against gay men in the 1980s in Poland. Yeah, so they started creating so-called pink files. They started catching those peoples all over the different places that they could, and they started creating files on them, and those files after 1989 disappeared. Yes, they cannot be reached. Probably they are somewhere, but no one knows where, and it is discussed and so on. And this movie was made in 2021, and it really refers to the situation that erupted in Poland with this. Probably you heard about this LGBTQ zones. Free zones, LGBTQ free zones that were created by many counties in Poland. The protests that were set against this at the beginning in Warsaw. So this movie appeared, and it showed actually that the right-wing government they are stressing the victims who suffered during the communist period, and now you have gay people who also suffered during the communist period, but you want to completely erase them, and you are saying that we should tell truth about what was going on back then. Yeah, so I think that in most of these movies, you can find these references. The same is like, for example, with The Art of Loving. Yes, the story about Michalina Wisłocka. It was a perfect coincidence that this movie was released right in the moment when women's black protests started in Poland, and actually it turned out that the main protagonist speaks the lines that women used during the protests. Yeah, and many of them didn't see the movie because the protest started in October 2016, I think. Yeah, and the movie officially was released in January 2017. Yeah, so there are references, and for sure it is like that. That with particular movies you can pinpoint it really actually, but in some cases you have to dig deeper, but it is like that they are very much connected to what is going on now.
This question, it is also always the question of audience, and the films from the socialist period, I think they were mainly screened in the local branches of Polish Association of the Deaf and sent to different branches, but so it was quite national circulation, but actually the socialist states were promoting this internationalization of different areas, and one of them was there was this idea of internationalization of the deaf, of the blind. There were congresses organized in Bulgaria, in Hungary, in Poland, and during these congresses for the deaf organizations, there were festivals for of deaf films. So they also had this wider circulation. And it is very interesting that you asked about these recent films that were screened during the festival. And I think there is this this hope that so many people had, I don't know, 5 years ago, that when you upload something online, everybody will see it. But it doesn't work like this. Nobody sees your stuff that is put online. You have to put a lot of work to reach wider audiences. And that is the problem with these minority circulations. Very many deaf people know these films because they spread in these social networks that we have. But more and more it is an activist work that these authors send these films to institutions, to museums, for exhibitions, to reach the wider audience. So there are some attempts, and definitely these films, the contemporary ones, are activist films. Definitely. Thank you.
So thank you very much for the great lectures. And first of all, I'll introduce myself. My name is Magdalena. I'm an early modern historian from Warsaw, and I'm here actually for private reasons. So thank you very much for the invitation. Actually, I have two questions to each of you, but I will focus on the question to Elżbieta Durys, as I feel actually. I will try to speak as a historian. Although I'm not much familiar with historical movies, but from my point of view, this is a great problem because it tells us a lot about identity, how we as Poles, how and in which historical period, on which historical moments, how we try to find our identity, what we think is important for building our identity, and generally, do we really need it? Yeah, this is a question. So, from what you have said, I have understood that 121 historical movies is quite a good result. But as as I have said, I'm not so much familiar about the author of these movies, but I have an impression that majority of those films refer to the transition period, so 89 and so on, 90s, 2000, or period of maybe Second World War or just after the Second World War. There's no or almost no movies that go beyond that period. There's almost nothing about 19th, 18th, 17th, 16th, 15th centuries. So, and I have an impression that this is a question that paradoxically, during the communist time, especially after Stalin's death, when the Gomułka came, this Polish historical cinema was much better condition because these historical memory, historical topics, they treated about I would say the old history, the Middle Ages, the history of the Middle Ages, of the early modern, of the 19th century, and even referred to the Second World War. Yeah, the Wajda, big screen filmmakers. Yeah, so the question is, I mean, how would you what is your opinion about this?
Mm-hmm. I mean, or the second question to Magda. But Matilda, you said you had two questions about. Okay, yeah.
To Magdalena, but maybe I think myself this question,
Yeah.
and if you have some time,
Yeah.
I can.
Yeah. Historical cinema needs money, really a lot of money. Yeah, it is not like accident that mostly develops in Europe and United States. Because we have money to invest into it. Because before, even though if filmmaker does not stick to to facts, he or she needs to do the research. And also it is confirmed by the fact that usually, because of the gender issues, women are not granted much money for their projects. So you can look and you can check that most of the historical movies are being made by men because they are granted more money usually. So this is one reason. You need to have a stable situation to have a money to spend on settings, costumes, research, and so on and so on. Yeah. So this historical cinema needs money. So more or less during the communist time, when the situation became stable, they were able to invest into historical epics. Yeah. But also they had a much easier situation because they were referring to books, because most of those movies were actually the adaptations. Yes, Colonel Wołodyjowski, yes, in general Sienkiewicz. Yes, in most of the cases. So there was the need among the audience. Now this great literature of Polish of 19th century is no longer so much speaking to the audience. During this first wave of historical cinema after 1989 that I mentioned, there was an attempt to do this. And those movies were popular. But when they tried to check who actually attended those movies, why they were so popular, it was mostly schools. Yes, students that instead of reading books, they were taken by teachers and they made the audience. Yeah, so this is the issue. Yeah, so I think with the stabilization of the situation and now actually, because we had pandemic period, yes, and everyone was afraid that cinema is going to collapse after this, no money and so on. You won't believe it. In Poland before the pandemics, something like 50 movies a year was made. Now it's last year, I think it was something like 80 movies, feature films that were made in Poland. Yeah, so with the money that comes with the like more interest in history and more diverse interest in history, maybe it is going to happen. But I think that Cinema of National Remembrance was very focused on the 20th century because of the atmosphere created by Institute of National Remembrance and all the people who were affiliated with this, and they like pressed those issues. Yeah, so this is.
Thank you very much. In the same way, I don't know that much about Polish film, but you answered some of my question, and my question in general is, what kind of metaphors, historically based myths of what are those that were used? Is there like a class of myths, or is it what?
Those movies mainly refer to this idea of Paul as a warrior who is eager to fight and devote his life for the nation, for the country, for the freedom. And usually it is like that he, especially in this heroic tendency, the first preceding the one that I talked to you about, the recurring like plot line was like that he dies, usually killed by the communist secretly, and he is forgotten. But now his story can be digged out, and he is the one who should become our hero. And very often it was accompanied by a Christian iconography. So there is a lot of young men who are presented as sort of Christ figure, both in Pieta style. And also, when they die, they usually die like that, yes, with crisp white shirts, with the red blood, on it, yes. So it's like, it's recurring Wajda tried a little bit with ancient tradition. For example, in Katyn, he referred to Antigone. But then it was not that popular because Wajda himself in Katyn used a lot of Christian references, yes, to Jesus figure and so on. But then it was repeated over and over again, and that is why people got a little bit frustrated with this. Yes, they were feeling okay. We had those heroes, we had those martyrs, but it's time to move on and to look at the communist period from a little bit different perspective. And it is not so much that now metaphors are being used, but the aesthetics. Yes, so the period of communist time is being shown through different colors. Yeah, and even journalists complain that you go to historical movie, everything is yellow. Yeah, so yeah.
Thank you. For you, my question is, where is there is an overlap between silent films and deaf. So-called deaf films, and that overlap, is it good, or does it help to propagate deaf movies? And if it is helpful, why isn't that included in the name somehow, parentheses, silent films, because then it maybe it creates the connection between the two. Mm-hmm. That's my question.
Thank you so much for this question. It is very, very interesting. Actually, the silent film era that lasted from the beginning of the cinema in the late 19th century till the late 1920s is called by deaf in-depth studies like as a golden era of film for deaf people, because there was no difference between deaf audiences and hearing audiences. Actually, there were deaf people, deaf actors in Hollywood playing in the movies, in Charlie Chaplin's movies as well, because they didn't have to speak actually. So when the transition to sound came, all these people have to leave Hollywood, because just as actors with heavy accents, for example, it was not acceptable to not to have a perfect speech. And also it was a problem for audiences. Like within several seasons, films stopped to be accessible for deaf audiences. So there is a thing with silent films, and actually, when you look at contemporary deaf films, they are not silent. They actually use sound very extensively. For example, the films that Tomasz Grabowski makes, the one you could see, The Magical Gloves, he is a deaf person, but he adds score to his films, but he does it visually. He just watches how the score looks like in the computer, and he edits it with the visuals. And also these films are, there's this idea of interdependency, of interdependent cinema, not independent, like deaf people being assisted by hearing supporters, allies to help them with the sound. And actually another thing which is quite interesting, when I come across like these films, all digitized versions of the old film reels that were digitized by the deaf people, they are not silent at all. For example, they projected the old film on the screen and set the camera, like digital camera, in front of it, of the screen, to digitize it. And for example, they didn't close the window. So actually I can see that like the siren is going somewhere, someone is speaking, like there's this noise, the city noise is out there. You can hear the projector. So they are not aware that they are making sound films actually, which like this distinction is like very interesting to conceptualize, but it is not always the case, actually.
In the interest of time, I will group the last two questions.
I was a little disappointed that you focused only on the cinema as cinema of creators, but what about accessibility to the sort of speaking movies? And I think that's also a big subject, because we all use, probably to some extent, closed captions on TV, but not in the movies.